Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hello, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome back to another awesome episode of Modern Leadership Podcast. Today, we are talking about how to free ourselves from our business. To work on our business, not just in it. And to do that, I have invited an on-purpose business leader, Scott Beebe, to join us. Scott is the founder and head coach of mybusinessonpurpose.com, where he liberates, and I love that, he liberates small business owners from the chaos of working in their business. And I know you know what I'm talking about here, and this is going to be a fun discussion. He is the host of the Business on Purpose podcast. He's created the 4 Steps to Business Freedom, a 6-month group coaching experience built exclusively for small business owners to guide them in creating the systems and processes that they need to get their businesses and lives back on track. Scott, I know you have a ton of great stories to share with these modern leaders. Welcome. How are you doing?
Jake, I am fantastic. I cannot wait to get started. I mentioned to you in the chat that I'm pumped and ready to go. I come, as I tell people, pre-caffeinated. So I'm excited to get to hang out with you a little bit.
Well, and as I said, I want to get you going while you're pumped. And you said that ain't going nowhere. That's sticking around. That's going to be with us the whole half hour.
That's right. That's right. And we'll have some fun with it too. And it's funny, Jake, we talk about small businesses, and when you think about small businesses, everybody talks about the startup and the entrepreneur and all that stuff. And then you get into business, you're like, oh, I've got invoicing and payables and receivables and all of that stuff. And so a lot of small business owners don't get really excited when they hear small business, but we're going to make it fun.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's an experience that myself and many others face, and that is we get excited about the idea. Entrepreneurship is a great idea, and on paper it looks super fun, and then you get into it and you go, oh no, I didn't realize there was this and this and this. But you're right, we are going to have fun. Before we do that though, what did we miss by way of families, hobbies, or personal life?
Jake, Ashley and I have been married just a little over 19 years, and we just have so much fun together. In fact, I just got done having lunch with her on the back porch of our house overlooking the Chichessie Creek in the low country of South Carolina. So that's where we actually live. And we've got 3 little monkeys, 16, 14, and 12, just all started back school again, and 2 in high school, which we just can't get over. But we're so excited for them. And then we got our little middle schooler, and we have a lot of fun. Probably the biggest adventure we've been on recently is we've been working in Nigeria for about 11 years now. And for the first time this summer, we all got to go. So my wife's been, my daughter's been, but our 2 boys, who are our youngest kids, they have not been. And so this summer, we all got to go together and go experience that.
How incredible. Now, you say you've been working over there for a number of years. What kind of work? Is it missionary work, or is it small business help, or what are you doing?
Yeah, so we call it domain work. So we do work with faith-based non-governmentals and nonprofits, and we do it through domains. So education, business, agriculture, social welfare, those sorts of things. And so what we like to do, I operate under a philosophy my mentor Bob Roberts told me years and years ago. It's called Glocal. He actually ripped it off from somebody too. But it's the merging of the word global and local. Whatever you do locally, do that globally. And whatever you do globally, do it locally. So, Jake, for you, if I were to say, hey, man, you speak, you do podcasts, you're an influencer. I want you to go over to Indonesia and I want you to set up children's hospitals. Yeah, you should in your heart go, okay. I mean, I could probably do that, but that's not really my thing. But we do that all the time with global work, is we take people out of what they're naturally skilled at, naturally gifted at, and we put them into a position just because they're kind of warm bodies with a pulse and say, hey, go do this because this is what we think they need. And instead, what we've been doing for a while now is we go really understand what our friends on the ground in Nigeria need. And we try to leverage the skills of people around the world and bring those folks there to partner with locals to help them grow both non-governmentals and also for-profit entities.
What an incredible idea. Now, you did mention, you said, Jake, if you had to head off to Indonesia, you may say, I don't know. I have to tell you, Scott, we've been back in the States for 3 weeks. We just got back from 1 year as a family abroad, 12 countries in 11 months, including 6 months in Asia. So we would be the family to go do that.
I love it, Jake. Hey, call me next time you go and we'll go with you.
Hey, that'll be a blast. We're definitely going to do that. Now, I want to ask you, as you start working with these Nigerians and you're over there, what is the biggest challenge that you're seeing as far as, I understand you're working in a lot of different sectors, education and government and politics and all that, but are you seeing that there's opportunity that they just don't know about? Are you seeing that they're being kind of repressed, or what's the biggest challenge that you're finding over there?
Well, certainly there's cultural, there's socioeconomic challenges. There's all the things that you kind of see on the surface. Just like where I'm at in the States right now, there's all sorts of things that we see on the surface, whatever you want to call it. You know, at this stage of our time, we're having a lot of political unrest internally, and not so much political unrest in terms of upheaval, but just political unrest in terms of drama. And so wherever you go around the globe, you're going to have elements like that people are having to fight against. But I'll tell you, Jake, what we have found, and I don't mean to be overly philosophical in this, but what we have found is the greatest barrier to progress, both in Nigeria, where we've worked for a long, long time, and also right here in the United States, and these heroic small business owners that we get to spend time with, is what we boil down to one word, and it's implementation. And it's one of the reasons we were so taken and fascinated. My wife and daughter had the privilege of being able to go to Sicily in southern part of Italy to work with refugees on the front part of the trip. So we actually met them in Europe before going down to Nigeria. And was so fascinated because Sicily is covered up in refugees right now. And they're all coming in, not all, but the majority are coming in over on dinghies across the Mediterranean, and they're coming from all over the African continent, predominantly North and West Africa. You're getting some East Africans, but a lot of the Middle Easterners are going up through other parts of Europe. And so they had all of these guys. And the thing that so impacted me, because she would FaceTime me all the time from Sicily, is what we found is you almost had these what we called pre-qualified people. And what I mean by that is we spend so much time in Nigeria trying to find people who are willing to implement. They're willing to put in the grind. They're willing to put in the hard work. Because you've heard it, Jake, before. Like Seth Godin has said this, I'm an overnight success, and it only took me 14 years to get here.
That's right.
We tend to overlook the 14 years and the grind and the uphill and the thighs burning, and we're sweating, and it's hard. But in Sicily, what you found were guys who were willing to literally have a 50-50 shot of living or dying just to have something better. And so it was almost like they were pre-qualified. You found guys who were ready to implement at a moment's notice. Now, they have other challenges, like it's illegal to work for 8 months. And so you've got these pre-qualified guys who are dying to work, and they're dying to have a life that almost quite literally, they're willing to die to have this life to where they can produce and progress, but they're not able to. And that's a totally different discussion, but that's the biggest challenge we found, both globally but also locally. Who's willing to put in the grind? Who's willing to put in the work to get to where they want to go?
And I think that is so fascinating. You know, as we spend our time around the world, what I found is there are tremendously intelligent people, there are hardworking people, there are caring people all over the world. And sometimes they don't have the same avenues, the same platforms to express that inner talent, that inner skill that they have. And that's why I wanted to ask you about that, which then led us to this discussion about this. I call it the immigrant mindset. If you look at the United States and how it was founded and how, you had a lot of immigrants coming over and they were working hard and they had what you were talking about, that action orientation, that really go out and do it. And so now as we transition this conversation to the small business owners of today and we're working with them today, how can we help them build that mindset within themselves, that action orientation to go out and do what needs to be done?
Jake, a lot of it has to be a draw of motivation. From what we've found, again, this is just experience. Some people may have a different way, but from what we've found, it's a draw of motivation. And what I mean by that is we're not going to guilt people into getting better. I've rarely in my life been guilted into getting better and guilted into progress. Instead, we've been able to work, again, with the heroes that are small business owners to show, hey, let's talk about where you could go. And so let's try to entice you out of apathy. Let's try to entice you out of chaos. You mentioned liberating small business owners from their chaos. One of the reasons that we try to liberate is initially laying out what we call a vision story so that we can, in great detail, articulate what the future of their business looks like. And once they start to get a taste of that, to go, wait a second, I can actually draw this up. And we go, yeah, you can. You can draw it up right now in pages of detail around the future of your family, the future of your finances, the future of your product, your service, your clients, your culture, all those sorts of things. We can lay that out and begin to entice you and kind of draw you out of this chaos into something that is really dynamic. And quite frankly, Jake, it is hard. So we're not out here preaching a gospel of ease. We're out here preaching the message to say, hey, there is something great that God has given you a gift for. And so let's draw that up so you can begin to move towards that instead of drawing up nothing so you just begin to scatter.
And this is a theme of modern leadership that we try to communicate every week on the podcast. And that is, it takes work. It's not ease. And the reason that I think this is so important, Scott, is because I think we're surrounded now by companies and by governments. Everybody's trying to make life easier. I had a conversation yesterday about TiVo and how it's not interruption marketing anymore. You can record your show and you can just watch it when you want to. And now we have on-demand Netflix and we have all of this stuff that's supposed to make our lives easier. I remember growing up, and you probably do too, Scott, going out every week and mowing my lawn. Now what do we do? Well, we hire somebody. And if you live in Arizona where I do, you just put in the fake stuff so you don't have to go out and do it. I wonder if as a society we try to make things easier, if that's kind of extinguishing that entrepreneurial fire that we need, what you're talking about, that hard work, that desire to go above and beyond, and what you say, liberate ourselves from the chaos. And I wonder if there's something that we need to add to our lives or to our businesses to make sure we keep that fire going. What's the wood to keep the fire going?
It's a great book by Sherry Turkle called Reclaiming Conversations. Probably came out maybe a year or 2 years ago. I will warn people, it's a very statistical read. She's an MIT researcher who's been studying sociology and technology for about 3 decades. So you can imagine she's been studying all of us as we relate to technology in the biggest technological boom in human history. And that's what she's been doing. And so she wrote this great book called Reclaiming Conversations. And in the book, she fundamentally makes this sort of paraphrased point. And that is, when we miss out on human interaction, human conversation, because we've got our nose down or whatever, and this is not meant to be a technological discussion, but I think it really hits on the point that you're talking about, is how do we remind people of the ethic and the work and the grind? Well, a lot of times when we do hire things out, and I agree, there are times, in fact, we talk to our heroic small business owners all the time about delegation roadmaps and what things are you doing as a technician working in your business that we need to bring you back as an owner working on your business. And so we've got to free those things up. So let's hire those things out. But there are some things, Jake, that I think are worth hanging on to. And the reason is, and this is what Turkle was proving in her book, or at least one of the points is, when you mow your own grass or vacuum your own floor or wash your own car, there are nuances within that experience, whether it's an interaction with a neighbor as they walk by, or it's the frustration of the hose blowing up right under your car, or you forgot the gas. Those are situations that just happen to come up. Yesterday, we've got a little John boat out in the back of our house. It's a dingy little 14-foot cheap little John boat. We call them vintage boats, Jake, because that's the kind of boats we buy. They're actually just really old boats. And so I went out there and I pumped the bulge, and gas just started going everywhere. Man, I had this thing drawn up. I was going to take my wife out for a little 30-minute cruise, sunset, the whole thing, and there's gas pouring out of the motor. And it's that nuance that forces me as a human being to have to deal with that, to not show massive frustration to my wife, to not shut down and miss the moment that we could just sit back on a rocking chair and hang out. Yeah, the boat didn't work out, but we can sit on a rocking chair. When we hire everything out, we not only lose out on potential ethic, but we also lose out on the capability as a human being and what those soft skills are to maneuver situations that just emerge that are totally out of our control.
And one of the things we talk about are the leadership superpowers, and there's 5 of them, one of them being problem solving. And I think what you're talking about here, these little nuances, they stimulate that problem solving, which is a leadership superpower that you need to exercise. Like you said, if you've hired everything out and something goes wrong, you have no frame of reference to step in and help out. As a leader, you're not able to be in there with the troops because you've been farming it out the whole time. And so I think you're absolutely right about that. Now, Scott, let's transition here and talk about these 2 non-negotiables that a small business must have. When you're running a small business, what are these 2 non-negotiables?
So I think, Jake, the assumption is the non-negotiables are great accounting structure, great invoicing process, receivable setup, a great advertising piece, those sorts of things. I think these non-negotiables might surprise a couple of people. Some may not, because you realize that you're in the weeds and you look at them and go, oh my goodness, yes, what I would not give for that. Number 1, this is the first diagnostic question we ask any heroic small business owner, and it is simply, do you have a vision story written down? I'm not talking about, Jake, a vision story like, hey, we want to be the world's most magnificent brand serving unicorns and jelly beans with a land flowing with milk and honey. I mean, that's, just kind of broad, ethereal, generic thing. I'm talking about specificity. Where are you going as a business? That's number 1. And most people they're not going to have that. They haven't taken the time to sit down and write that. But the reason it is a priority is because the proverb is true. Where there is no vision, people scatter. And there's another incredibly powerful Jewish text where it's a prophet named Habakkuk. And as the story goes, God is speaking to him and says, write the vision down so that those who read it may run. Write the vision down so that those who read it may run. And anybody looking for that, you can look in the Old Testament text of Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2, and you can actually get that snippet. It's a powerful snippet. And Jake, the reason it is because when you write the vision down, those who read it may run. Now, if I could add on to that, which I'm really leery of doing with anything that's holy and good and all of that, but let me just kind of add on to that. Write the vision down so that those who read it may run towards it or may run away from it. One of the reasons that so many small business owners are in chaos is because they don't have clarifying vision written down. And so some customers, clients, employees that are not a good fit for the business did not get a heads up that they needed to run away from the vision from the get-go. And so they have to now deal with that. They have to deal with a customer that doesn't fit or an employee that doesn't fit because they didn't lay out the vision to begin with to let you decide as a potential customer, as a potential employee, oh my, no, I don't want to be a part of that. Or just the opposite. I have to be a part of that because of the vision you've written down. So that's number 1. The second non-negotiable, and again, as crazy as this sounds, it's not a mission statement. It's not an advertising piece. It's not core values. Those are very important. But the second most important non-negotiable is a team meeting structure that is agenda-driven, leader-led, cost-assessed, and is laced with predictability. And so if you've got those things in a team meeting structure, now think about this, Jake. What you've got is you've got a detailed snapshot of where you're going. So now everybody knows where they're going so they can be on the same page. It limits the ability to be scattered. And if you've got a team meeting structure set up, it's no different than my wife and I choosing to have conversation, face-to-face conversation every night. If Ashley and I decided that we were just going to have conversation haphazardly maybe once a month, things would not go well with us. And so why in the world do we think any different within our businesses if we have haphazard human interaction, face-to-face, whether it's live and in person or via Zoom or Skype or whatever, but face-to-face interaction where you're working through situations that arise just like we were talking about earlier. So those are the 2 non-negotiables that we've seen experientially.
And these are hugely powerful. And I want to dive in just a little bit more on the second one, but I want to make a comment on the first one. And that is, too many small businesses are trying to be everything to everybody, which makes them nothing to everybody. Focus in on who you want to be, and your true tribe, your tribe of true believers will seek you out, and they're easier to work with. They don't complain as much. They don't ask for refunds. They deal with the problems and the obstacles easier than those who don't get it or shouldn't be on the train in the beginning. Now, the second thing I wanted to ask you about this team meeting structure, do you suggest that they have it on a weekly, on a monthly, or is it really dependent on the type of organization, how large, the budget, those kind of things?
Yeah. So Jake, what we found, I don't know if you've ever seen the show The Prophet with Marcus Lemonis, but one of my favorite statements he says is when he comes into a business, he'll bring in some equity, financial equity in the business. He might buy in at 30% or 80% or 20% or whatever, but he'll write the check. And right before he allows them to take the check that he's written them, usually for 6 or 7 figures, he'll look across to them and he'll say, now listen, I know I'm only a 40% equity part in this business once you receive this check. But I want you to understand that once you receive this check, I am 100% in charge for the next 90 days. And when it comes to team meeting structure, Jake, what we tell people is when we lay out the team meeting structure, at that point, we're 100% in charge for the next 90 days of your team meeting structure. And the reason is, some people say, well, we only need to meet once a month or twice a month or whatever. We actually recommend meeting once per week to start with. Why? Is because we want you to create a habit. Even if it's redundant, even if it feels like, oh my goodness, we just met, I don't care. We want to generate a habit. And there are a few elements that are very, very important in generating that habit. Actually, there's 5. The first is you got to have a defined agenda. And then that agenda can be very powerful. We actually start our team meetings and we encourage everybody to start them off with big wins along with the mission and values. And don't just rotely repeat the mission and values. Literally you say, hey, tell us a story where you saw us live out one of our unique core values over the last week. And so you tie that to a story. That usually takes about 5 minutes. And then from there, we move into an action items time. We go back to last week's meeting and say, hey, here are the things we discussed last week. Where are we at on that? And then once we've all been held accountable to that, then we move into the business discussion item around the systems in our business.
And before you go into that, let me just add on that number 2, how important I think that one is. I want the listeners to make sure that they caught that one. You're holding people accountable. You had a meeting last week. You said, these are the action steps we're going to get done. The very next week, you're following up in the beginning of the meeting and saying, where does everybody stand on this? It gives people an opportunity to celebrate the wins of accomplishment and also to realize the mistakes made. And it's not about shaming and it's not about guilt. It's about recognizing that things that needed to be done for whatever reason might not have got done, but we can refocus and redo them. So I wanted to jump in and add that on number 2 before moving on to number 3.
Jake, I'm curious in your experience with people that you've worked with before in their team meeting structure, the accountability, because we see the same thing. But I'm curious with your experience, you talk to somebody about accountability and they go, yeah. What have you found is kind of the biggest barrier from people actually doing it?
So accountability, it's one of those things that you ask people about and they all say, oh yes, I think this is utmost important. You got to have accountability. But what we found is accountability isn't the starting point. Accountability is the next step after what you have is conviction. You have to have this passion and this dream, this vision, what you talked about. Do you have a vision or a story that's written down? Once you have that, what we call conviction, well, then you move into accountability. Now, why do people not get things done? I think that the biggest reason that I've found in the companies that I've worked with that people aren't getting things done is fear. So you go into a sales situation. Why aren't the salesmen making the 10 or 15 calls they're supposed to be making on an hourly basis? It's because they're afraid to pick up the phone. But then when you dive deeper into that, what we found, Scott, is that it's not fear of making the call. It's fear of not looking like they know what they're doing. Fear of not being able to answer the question. So that comes back to how well do you have your team trained? Do they understand what their role and responsibility is? And if they do, then they have the confidence or the conviction to move forward. And that accountability follows through that.
Wow. That's insightful. Yeah, and that's why we bookend the meeting with it, actually, because you're going to see in just a second in that element, once we've done our mission and values and our big wins, we go to the accountability. Then we have business items discussions. Those are the week-to-week things that come up. And we talk about that. But then the very next step in the agenda, accountability sheet again. And so everything we just talked about, we've got to make sure that gets in your Trello board. We actually started for 2 years, Jake. All we used was a Google spreadsheet as our action item sheet. And we literally had 4 columns on it. The item we were discussing, who's responsible, the date it's due, and any associated notes. And we use that for 2 years. We've since gone to Trello. It works great. I don't care what you use. I don't care if you use Post-it notes. Whatever works, implement it. And so we come back to action items. And then we end the meeting. This is actually in the agenda with a training time. Because if you can spend 10 minutes a week training your team on the back end of the meeting where you're already there, every team member is going to walk away at the end of the year with 8 additional hours of training throughout the year, and it took you no additional time off-site or out of that team meeting. And so people ask, well, what do we train on? Just go to their job role. Whatever their job role says they're supposed to do, train on that, and it's an easy way to do it. And so that's the first thing you got to have in a team meeting is your agenda. The second thing is you got to have a defined leader. And by the way, it doesn't have to be, quote, the leader. This is a great opportunity if you're highly agenda-driven in your meeting to spread the responsibility of leadership and grow leaders through the team meeting. That's the second thing. The third element of a great team meeting is a defined participant. Just because they're employed in the business doesn't mean they necessarily need to be there. And by the way, we've got virtual team members, and we involve our virtual team members in our team meetings. And so some of you have virtual assistants. You need to meet with them on the regular basis. We just got off the phone with our virtual CFO. Meeting with them about tax strategies. And so we meet with them on a regular basis. We don't just trust them to do everything because that's unfair to them. And so ask yourself who needs to be a part of this meeting and kept up with great regularity. The fourth part, if you just Google HBR for Harvard Business Review, cost calculator, HBR cost calculator, you can go in there and actually plug in numbers that will show you exactly how much a team meeting costs you in real dollars, in US dollars. And so you got to understand your cost. When you meet for an hour and sometimes those meetings go for 3 hours, you've just tripled your cost in doing that meeting. And finally, the fifth element of a great team meeting is what we call an atmosphere of predictability. And it's based on something that we drew up called the seesaw of predictability. And on either side of the seesaw, Jake, one side is a predictable question. The other side, imagine a clock, it's a predictable time. And if I ask you a predictable question at a predictable time, like, hey, Jake, let's say we agreed on this podcast that you were going to send me a follow-up email. And I would say, hey, Jake, do you have all of my information for that follow-up email? That's a predictable question. It's at the end of our podcast time, so it's a predictable time. But if I texted you tomorrow morning at 2 a.m., hey, Jake, where is the email for our next podcast interview? That's kind of an unpredictable question. It's a very unpredictable time. And I feel a little bit like a micromanager, like I'm overbearing at that point.
And I feel lack of trust. I feel like you're not giving me the space to do what I need to do as well.
Which is the hallmark of a micromanager, right?
Absolutely.
Is any micromanager we've ever worked for, we distrust them. And it's because they ask unpredictable questions at unpredictable times. So a predictable question for me to ask you is a week ago, hey, Jake, we're 7 days out. Remind me, where do I get the information for our podcast? Predictable question at a predictable time. Your team meetings become the predictable time. Now your agenda is the predictable question. When you've got those two things in place and you've got a vision that you're running toward, the old saying, Katie bar the door. I mean, the business is going to grow at that point.
So now when you come into a business, you're saying that you as the consultant that comes in takes over their meetings for the first 90 days to help get them in this process. Is that what I heard you say?
So there's two different elements of that. There are actually a couple of businesses. There are 3 right now where we're providing what we call virtual COO services. So we actually lead their team meetings. But for the rest of them, the way that we're 100% in charge of the first 90 days is they have to follow our exact team meeting prescription line by line for the first 3 months. And at that point, they're released to kind of adjust on their own.
Well, I love this because this gives the opportunity. I can imagine the first week, it's awkward, it's different. People kind of don't know what they're feeling. You talk about this atmosphere of predictability. As soon as you make this change, it creates an atmosphere of unpredictability. But as you go through on a weekly basis for 90 days, then all of a sudden people start to recognize and start to see it. It becomes habitual, and then it becomes easy. It becomes the new norm. So I love that. I wanted to mention too, have you read the book, The Monk and the Riddle by Randy Komisar?
I read it I think 3 or 4 years ago. And yes, fantastic little read.
It's great. I just had him on the podcast. We had this conversation, and one of the things he said, so he's a venture capitalist that funds a lot of these startup businesses out of Silicon Valley. And his comment was, people come to me asking for money, and they don't understand I don't give money. I give leadership. Yeah, sure, my money comes with it, but it's my ability to help you lead this company, to do the things that you just walked us through. A defined agenda, defined leader, defined participant, the cost, defined costs, and then this atmosphere of predictability that is really the benefit for small businesses. Because money is great, but it can also be flushed away just as easily without the proper foundation put in place that your leadership provides. And so I love this conversation. Scott, I look at our time. We could talk forever. I'd love to get into the 4 steps of business freedom. We might have to do that next time. But before we wrap up, I have this favorite section where we learn from leaders, put a little personal into this business discussion that we've had, where I ask you 5 or 6 rapid fire questions. Does that sound like a plan?
Let's do it.
All right, wonderful. Okay, how about the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table?
This is going to be just crazy hilarious. It's a book called Jackpot. And I mentioned we live in the low country of South Carolina. I just got referred this book a few days ago because we had the opening sting on Ronald Reagan's war on drugs was a massive marijuana bust right down the street from where we live, and I had no idea about it until Sunday this past week when I saw it on a cover feature in one of our local papers. And so I went and bought this book, which I didn't know was written about it, and I am tearing through this book of these what they call gentlemen smugglers, these guys from the Palmetto State of South Carolina who were smuggling rampant amounts of marijuana from Jamaica, Colombia, and Lebanon in the late 70s and early 80s. And I don't know that I would recommend it to anybody, especially if you don't live here, but it is a fascinating read. And honestly, that's what's on my Kindle right now.
I love that. I mean, there's so many interesting just things happening around us all the time. And to learn about them is just great. How about the best movie ever made?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, Jake. I'm not a huge movie buff, but for me, when I go back, I cannot get off the movie Gladiator. I love the perceived humility and kind of loneliness of Russell Crowe. Actually, I'm actually an introvert, and so I identify with that, and just to see his struggle through that. So I'm going to go with Gladiator. And
it's a great recommendation. About 3 months ago, we were standing in the Colosseum in Rome, and I was imagining in my mind Russell Crowe, and all he went through, and you see the tunnels that they come running out of, and it's a mind over matter. It's a getting your mind in the right place type of movie, and I agree with you. How about your leadership superpower?
So my leadership superpower is in helping small business owners see what they cannot see. I had that told to me by a dear friend about 3.5 years ago. And at first I felt very uncomfortable to share that with other people because it could come across as a bit arrogant. But I've learned that you use the term superpower. We actually call it the narrow brilliance. I've learned that my narrow brilliance is being able to help others see what they cannot see.
And that's why I think getting a coach or having a group that you're working with is so vitally important, because we all have this narrow vision. But when we bring in those around us who have either walked the walk or can see a different perspective than us, I think it's absolutely a great superpower, helping others see what they can't see themselves. How about a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra?
Yeah, I go back to the mantra of write the vision down so that those who read it may run. We talk about it all the time. It is priority number 1 for what we do. I know it doesn't sound very tangible, but once you get into it, it is incredibly tangible and incredibly productive.
Perfect. How about if you could leave one leadership trait to the next generation or to your children, what would it be?
There's a passage in Exodus that is kind of overlooked, and it says, God gave Bezalel, the Spirit of God, giving him great wisdom, ability, and expertise in all sorts of crafts. I think we have done a very poor job in allowing people to understand that the skill set they have in commercial enterprise is a gift that they've been given. And so from our kids, that's literally the legacy we're trying to leave for them, is to help them understand that the skill set that they have is the gift they've been given to go serve other people.
And that could be a motivational mantra as well. That is a perfect thought. Thank you for that. Final question, best business book ever written?
Yeah, best business book for me that I have ever read is E-Myth. I mean, I just go back to it, but let me give a follow-up to that because I know you've probably had that one before. So that's Michael Gerber's E-Myth. If you're a heroic small business owner, or if you're a small business owner and don't know you're a hero yet, you are because you take courageous action. Michael Gerber's E-Myth is foundational reading for any small business owner. But let me give you a companion because we're so heavy into systems and processes. There's a great book by a guy named Atul Gawande, who's a Harvard surgeon, may still be actually. He wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto, and I highly, highly recommend the Checklist Manifesto to understand where the idea of checklist came from and why you need process in your business.
And I've got that one written down myself because that jumps out to me as one that I would like to read, the Checklist Manifesto. I have not heard of it, so thank you for recommending a book that has not been recommended on the podcast. Scott, you promised that we would have enthusiasm, that we'd have fun, it wouldn't be boring. You've delivered in spades. Can't thank you enough. Before we let you go, any last bit of advice that you want to leave us with? And then how can we learn more about you, your business, your podcast, and what you're up to?
Yeah, Jake, thank you so much. And again, before we kind of land this plane, I really do want to publicly thank you for the grind and the work. Doing a podcast is not easy, and you're doing it, and then you're allowing other people to come on to the stage with you. So thank you for building the stage. Thank you for gathering a crowd, and thank you for allowing us to have a conversation. So I do want to say that before we kind of land this thing. All right, so a couple of things. Number one, the parting piece of advice is you don't know where you're going in your business. If you don't, and don't have a clear vision for what you're doing, please stop what you're doing and write it down. Now, you may not know where to start. So here's what we've got. And this is also the best way to find us. Go to our online headquarters. If you go to mybusinessonpurpose.com/vision, so mybusinessonpurpose.com/vision, we have taken the entire first module of our flagship 4 Steps to Business Freedom group coaching program, and it is right there. We don't hold anything back. The entire video module's there. The template is there. Everything's right there. And so if you want to start building your vision story, you've got no excuse. You can hop on there, mybusinessonpurpose.com/vision. The only thing we ask from you is 2 things, your email, and the second thing is your implementation. If you sign up for it and don't implement, or you don't think you're going to, please don't sign up for it. But if you think you're going to implement and get after it and follow it step by step, and we'll walk you through it, go there, mybusinessonpurpose.com/vision, and we will help you draw up your vision story right now.
We are talking about execution. We're talking about go-getters, and the audience, the modern leadership audience, are go-getters, Scott. So I imagine that you will have people bouncing in there, getting the great stuff, and doing some tremendous things. Can't thank you enough for the time that you spent with us today. If there's anything we can ever do for you, please reach out. Let us know.
You're awesome, Jake. Thank you, man.
All right, Elite Achievers. Thank you, Scott. We had just a great discussion. I could have gone on for another couple of hours, but I know many of you have got to either get off the treadmill or get into the office. So we wanted to wrap with that great discussion that we had on the 2 non-negotiables that a small business, and really this could be anybody, right? Any organization, any corporation. Scott specifically works with small business, but whether you're in big business, small business, or solopreneur, these non-negotiables are so vitally important. So non-negotiable number 1, do you have a vision story written down? Do you know the direction that you're heading? We talk in the Elite Achiever Academy about the clarity path, about knowing the direction that you're going. Do you have it written down? And then the second non-negotiable is this team meeting structure. Do you have a structure put together? And I love the structure that Scott gave us. Number 1, a defined agenda. Number 2, defined leader. Number 3, defined participants. Number 4, a defined cost structure, or at least understanding, and you can get that over on the Harvard Business Review website. And then finally, an atmosphere of predictability. Earlier in the conversation, we talked about being liberated from the chaos. These 2 non-negotiables, these are the ways that we can liberate ourselves and our businesses from the chaos, that we can get clarity, that we can get focus, that we can get direction. And so if you feel like you've got so much going on, if you feel like you're swamped and you don't know where you're doing or what you're going, look at this podcast as guidance. The final thing I wanted to talk about is just this new terminology that we learned today, Glocal. If you can do it on a local basis, why can't you do it on a global basis? You know, the world is getting flatter. We have the opportunity to work with, learn from, and participate around the world with many different types of people and get different perspectives. Our client base, our customer base, our referral base, and our partner base has all been expanded. And so the idea of Glocal really hits me as something that's revolutionary. It's important for us to recognize and understand. Now, we talked about a lot. I know we did. I took a ton of notes. I've got 2 pages of notes that I'm going to get all typed up for you. To get all of them and everything we discussed, including how to connect with Scott and get that free gift that he offered to us about the module from their flagship course, head on over jakeacarlson.com/ML40. And until then, I want to wish you a great day, an even better life. Be intentional about your business. Free yourself from the chaos. Liberate yourself, as Scott would say, and stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.